in the series of webinars wherein we have been discussing about topics which are within the domain of law and beyond law, where we talk about the soft skills which one has to learn. And as a student of law, as well as a professional and one who is working, always feel as to whether the disciplinary proceedings can be proceeded once the employee stands superannuated, or what benefits can be withheld, and what are the benefits which have to be released in proceedings. And whether once there is a severance of relationship, let's assume where there is no pension, whether there would be a severance of relationship. These are the issues which keep on bothering the minds of a common man, as well as a lawyer and student of law. And in our pursuit to that, we requested Mr. P.S. Rajagopal, a well-acclaimed name in the fraternity and beyond that, in the perspectives of service law, who is a designated senior and is practicing out in Karnataka High Court. He acceded to our request to share the knowledge, because one point which has come across while we were discussing the various topics is that sometimes we feel that the judgment, if it has come, it can be applied in a simpliciter straitjacket formula. And we also sometimes feel that the judgments are more like a statute, that it will apply irrespective of the regulations. What is the way forward as an employee, as an employer, and how do we navigate further in that? Consequently, to, as we say, those who are already having some knowledge, they can brush up their knowledge in the right way, and those who are joining us as the students, they can always understand what are the finer points which one has to keep in their mind when the disciplinary proceedings are pending, and what could be the culmination, whether you can be dismissed retrospectively, whether there can be punishment of stoppage of increments retrospectively, or whether the pension cut would be there, or the pension itself fully can be withheld. For all these issues, over to Mr. P.S. Rajagopal. We are happy that he has joined us and would be sharing his knowledge. Thank you, sir.
I thank all of you, and I am grateful to Beyond CLC for providing me this opportunity to be with you all. This is one positive contribution of COVID-19, that breaking the barriers of the courts we practice, breaking the regional boundaries. This pandemic has brought us closer, and we are able to go beyond boundaries and proceed that on the basis that legal fraternity is one. Where irrespective of where we practice, our objective is same. That is, if I may say so, we are law workers. There is nothing called as a judge, a senior judge, or a chief justice, or an advocate, or a senior advocate. In a larger perspective, all of us are law workers, assembled to do what? To render justice. Because without justice, law is a useless tinsel, which has no meaning to the mankind or the society. So straight away proceeding to the subject about the disciplinary action. What happens to the disciplinary action on retirement? There are certain axioms or certain axiomatic truths we should remember. Irrespective of the rule or non-existence of the rule, to take disciplinary action against an employee who has committed a misconduct, it is an inherent right of the employer as long as the employee is in service. But once the employer-employee relationship is snapped, either due to resignation or due to retirement, the inherent right of the employer ceases. Thereafter, unless there is a specific rule or regulation which permits continuation of the disciplinary proceedings, even after superannuation or even after compulsory retirement, there is no power vested in the employer to proceed against the ex-employee in a disciplinary proceedings. It makes enormous sense also, because while joining service, a person has to give up lots of his fundamental rights. For example, if we see the evolution of the litigation in the matter of conduct rules, say an employee, he cannot criticize policies of the government. He cannot associate himself with press and radio. He cannot join a political party, but he can attend political gatherings. This question has come up before the courts any number of times. What happens to the fundamental rights of freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of thought, freedom of expression? Courts have categorically said that if you want to be a government employee, as long as you are in employment, you have to give up these rights, because that is a condition of your service. But the employer cannot insist on same regime even after retirement. It would be invading the fundamental rights of human beings, because I would like to distinguish between an employee and a human being. Yes, all employees are human beings, but in a limited sense only. The human rights or the fundamental rights cannot be kept in bounds when a person retires. Therefore, on retirement, the inherent right of the employer to punish his ex-employee ceases, except to the extent saved by the rules made in this behalf, the two valid rules. Now, the earliest judgment in the matter of post-retirement disciplinary proceedings. State of Assam versus Padamram Bora. An employee had retired peacefully. To disturb his peace, a few days after retirement, his service was extended, not as a badge of honor, but to continue against him the disciplinary proceedings which had been initiated while he was in service. The Supreme Court said he had retired, and thereafter you cannot extend this service, because it would be amounting to a new contract which you cannot unilaterally create. Therefore, it is axiomatic that unless a person is in service, and if his service is validly extended, the disciplinary proceedings cannot continue. Of course, thereafter certain amendments came or new rules came. Now, first let me complete that phase wherein employers under a valid rule were extending the service, subject of course to the condition that such an extension should come before the employee actually retires. First one is Padamram Bora case. Thereafter, what the employers were doing was, there was a rule particularly in even under the central government under Fundamental Rule 56 and in corresponding rules of the state services. A provision was made that an employee who is facing a disciplinary proceedings, that is, disciplinary proceedings must have actually been initiated. He can be continued in service for the purpose of completion of the disciplinary proceedings. In such a situation, what would happen? At the conclusion of the disciplinary proceedings, if the employee is found not guilty, he would be eligible for full salary and allowances for the period of extended service. And normally what they would do under the rule is that he would be kept under suspension, service would be extended. Therefore, even before the date of superannuation, he would continue to receive the subsistence allowance till the conclusion of the proceedings. And at the end of the proceedings, if he is found not guilty, he would be entitled for full salary. This became a burdensome exercise for the central government as well as state governments. I would just cite one example of central rule and the fundamental rule and one example of analogous rule in the state government of state of Mysore, the then state of Mysore, presently the state of Karnataka. In Raghava Rajagopalachari, that is to be precise, state of Assam versus Raghava Rajagopalachari, the services of the employee were extended without permitting him to retire beyond the date of superannuation pursuant to a criminal case that was pending against him, which had something to do with the employment, say under the Prevention of Corruption Act or whatever it is. Ultimately, he was acquitted. The state which had passed the order of extension, on noticing the acquittal, sought to retire him retrospectively and contend before the Supreme Court that our order of extension itself was wrong. We should not have extended. It was a wrong order. Then Supreme Court said, it is not open for you, the state, having passed an order, to come before this court and say that our order itself was bad. Respondent in a writ petition, in a proceeding where the employee or ex-employee approaches the court for implementation of that order and for the benefits of that order. In that proceedings, it is not open to the state to say that, look, you have come for implementation of this order. We renege from that order, or we say we disown that order. We say that our order was wrong. Then he was held entitled to be paid full back wages for the period beyond superannuation. Not full exactly in that case, because the Supreme Court found that his acquittal was not honorable. It was on the basis of benefit of doubt. Therefore, the government is entitled to withhold and determine what portion of the back wages he would be entitled. Similar case happened at the Mysore rule also in C.N. Vijayendra Rao's case. There also government failed in its effort to say that it was wrong to have extended service after actually having extended. Then came reliance on pension rules. Normally, every pension rule would provide that pension is subject to future good conduct. See the difference between a pensioner and a non-pensioner employee. In the case of a non-pensioner, employer-employee relationship snaps the moment he retires. Whereas in respect of pensioners, the service, though technically he ceases to be in service, a sort of relationship still continues, because pension, though it is paid as a consideration for the past service, future good conduct is also a condition precedent for continually getting the pension even after superannuation. Therefore, every pension rule provides that pension can be curtailed or forfeited or withdrawn or for a specified period in certain exigencies. What are those exigencies? Those exigencies are, suppose a pensioner is convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude, or in such a case, the pension can be either reduced or fully stopped, subject to certain conditions, which in the central pension rules, it says that minimum 1/3 will have to be continued to be paid even after that curtailment order. Therefore, these pension regulations invariably provided for two types of proceedings. One proceeding is where an employee in a post-retirement disciplinary proceedings, there are in one or two judgments, Supreme Court has also said, you cannot stricto sensu call those proceedings beyond retirement as disciplinary proceedings. They are only proceedings to regulate your pension, and you don't call it a disciplinary proceedings. Therefore, the pension regulations or pension rules, as we may call, provides for two contingencies where pension could be adversely affected. One is, suppose the disciplinary proceedings had been initiated while the employee was in service. That can be continued even after retirement for the purposes of two purposes: to recover any loss caused by the employee while he was in employment from the pension and gratuity payable to him. Gratuity is a problematic area. About specific gratuity specific problem, I'll come a little later. The other contingency is where the pensioner is convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude or a serious offense. They specify also the offenses like under the Official Secrets Act and all that. Then pension can be curtailed or wholly forfeited. But the inclusion of the word gratuity there is, strictly speaking, a misnomer, and in my respectful submission, gratuity can be bracketed with pension only where the employee is not governed by Payment of Gratuity Act. That is a controversial area. The post-retirement initiation or continuance of the proceedings under these pension rules are usually subject to two conditions. One is, if the proceedings have not been initiated while the employee is in service, even after superannuation, it can be initiated if it is a grave misconduct, number one. Number two, if it is an event which is not more than 4 years old as on the date of initiation of proceedings. Then insofar as the proceedings initiated while he was in service, it can be continued even after retirement. In such a case, the 4 years limitation would not apply, because as I was telling a little earlier, the right to initiate disciplinary proceedings against an employee is an inherent right of the employer while he is in service. Therefore, advisedly, no limitation is prescribed for continuation of the initiation in the matter of continuation of the proceedings already initiated while in service. But one condition is definitely there, that is, it should be in respect of a grave misconduct. Now, what is grave misconduct is a very gray area, because most of these service rules, if you take a look at, they do not classify the misconducts into minor misconduct and major misconduct, but they specify penalties as major penalties and minor penalties. The misconducts have not been classified as minor and major for whatever reason in most of the rules. Of course, I am also aware of the cases where the rules themselves classify, as for example, in bank employees bipartite settlements, both the misconducts have been classified as major and minor, as also the penalties. And for a minor misconduct, only a minor penalty can be imposed. For a major misconduct or gross misconduct, as the bipartite settlement uses, the major penalty also can be imposed. But what is a grave misconduct is something that is not defined anywhere. In one case, I tried to argue that if you look at the pension regulations, the word used is that grave misconduct while interpreting under regulation 48 of the bank pension regulations, they use a very specific phrase. It comes as a continuation of or along with the terms like it is the word grave misconduct used in the group of grave misconduct or negligence of or criminal breach of trust or forgery or acts done fraudulently during the period of service during the period when he was in office. The word grave misconduct is followed by specific terms like fraud, criminal breach of trust, the breach of Official Secrets Act, and all such grave offenses. Therefore, I tried to argue that grave misconduct used in the pension regulations has to be interpreted in the light of the company it keeps, that is fraud, criminal breach of trust, breach of Official Secrets Act, and the like. And unless such grave offenses are involved in the misconduct, you cannot treat it as a grave misconduct. Of course, that interpretation was rejected. The court said that it will have to be determined on a case-to-case basis, because one usual phrase we come across in service law, where it comes to the question of reasonable opportunity in for defense or exercise of discretion, whether it has been validly exercised, courts take a view. These are matters which are incapable of absolute definition, but will have to be determined on a case-to-case basis, depending upon facts and circumstances of the case. When Vikas was while introducing me, when he was telling about the confusion about the post-retirement proceedings, what occurred to my mind immediately was that what is a grave misconduct itself is a vague idea. I don't say it is a confusing idea, but it is a vague idea which will have to be crystallized into a decision whether the misconduct is grave or not, having regard to the facts and circumstances of each case, which is a phrase we come across very frequently in administrative law. What is a reasonable opportunity? It depends upon the rule. If there is no specified rule in what manner the disciplinary proceedings are to be conducted, Supreme Court said that it is a managerial function. Only requirement is reasonable opportunity should be given. What is reasonable to me may not be reasonable to somebody else. But judicially laid down test is that the fairness action in action should be the key word in ascertaining in a particular case whether employee has received a fair treatment or whether he has been given a reasonable opportunity. The closest attempt was made in one judgment by Justice J.S. Kehar while in Supreme Court. He said that when what is proved is only a mere negligence, it does not amount to grave misconduct. To invoke the concept of grave misconduct, there must be certain amount of dishonesty or misappropriation or fraud. But that is the closest we have come to define what is grave misconduct. Otherwise, there is no universally accepted meaning assigned to the phrase grave misconduct. Even in such a case, in respect of proceedings initiated while in service, where it is continued, what can be the punishment that can be imposed? This is the most controversial area in the matter of disciplinary proceedings after retirement. Latest judgment is something that is rendered by the Supreme Court in May 2020. That is Chairman cum Managing Director Mahanadi Coalfields versus Rabindranath Chaubey. Noticing that there are divergent views expressed by various benches of two judges. The matter had been referred to the three-judge bench. And that three-judge bench, in a judgment pronounced during the present pandemic, by a 2-1 majority, declared that even in a post-retirement proceedings, if it has been initiated while the employee is in service, dismissal can be imposed. Dismissal from service can be imposed. There, the matter is that resolves one issue. But on the second issue, whether payment of gratuity can be deferred pending completion of the disciplinary proceedings or pending conclusion of the criminal proceedings, in respect of which he has been notionally extended. I am using the word notionally extended because of a particular position in the rules, which say that where an employee is facing a disciplinary proceedings which are not concluded, or criminal proceedings are in progress, then he ceases to be an employee on the date of superannuation. But the disciplinary proceedings will continue as if he is in service. Now, as if he is in service means that there is something very strange. That is, he is not an employee for the benefits of employment, but he is an employee for the purpose of being dismissed. This is a very strange rule. Some effort, both in law as also beyond law, to borrow the phrase beyond law CLC, both in the courts of law and beyond them, effort will have to be made. There cannot be a dichotomy like this. I am an employee for receiving the beatings, but I am not an employee for receiving the salary. It's a very strange proposition. Be that as it may, more disturbing aspect of the three-judge judgment is, in this Rabindranath Chaubey, is that all the three judges unanimously held that payment of gratuity can be deferred until conclusion of the disciplinary proceedings or criminal proceedings. And ultimately, if he has been found guilty in the disciplinary proceedings, gratuity also can be forfeited. In this regard, it adopted a very strange reasoning that Payment of Gratuity Act is a general act and the service rules is a special provision. Therefore, the special provision prevails over the general provision. This, with respect, I would say, is contrary to coordinate bench judgments in respect to the Gratuity Act and also in respect of determination as to what is a special law and what is a general law. If you take Payment of Gratuity Act, Section 14 of the Payment of Gratuity Act 1972 gives overriding effect to the provisions of the Payment of Gratuity Act. It would be useful to notice the text of Section 14. It says, the provisions of this act or any rule made thereunder shall have effect, notwithstanding anything inconsistent therewith contained in any enactment other than this act or in any instrument or contract having effect by virtue of any enactment other than this act. Therefore, this covers not only a pure and simple contract of employment, but even the statutory service conditions also. In fact, this very question, whether deductions or recoveries can be made from the gratuity, came up before the Supreme Court in respect of in Som Prakash Rekhi, who was an employee of erstwhile Burma Shell and present Bharat Petroleum or some oil company, which is established pursuant to an act of the Parliament. 3 judges of the Supreme Court said that look at text of Section 14 of the Gratuity Act. It says that it will supersede in the matter of gratuity any other enactment or rule or contract or an instrument having the force of law, because it is a statute. Under the Payment of Gratuity Act, it is a complete code. It provides when the gratuity has to be paid, at what rate it has to be paid, and what can be the recoveries from the gratuity, how those recoveries will have to be made, what is the penalty for delayed payment, that is payment beyond 30 days from the date. Supreme Court also held that Payment of Gratuity is a complete code. Beyond that, you cannot make a recovery. Now look at the present judgment, what it says. Suppose the post-retirement proceedings take about 10 years. Payment of gratuity can be deferred for those 10 years. And ultimately, if he is held guilty, at the end of 10th year, it can be forfeited or recoveries can be made from the gratuity. This proposition is rippling. What, according to me, would have happened is 2 aspects of payment of gratuity have not been appreciated by the Supreme Court. One is, if you take the pension rules, central pension rules or state pension rules, it defines pension to include gratuity also. It is fine insofar as the state is concerned, because Payment of Gratuity Act says it is not applicable to the employees of the central and state governments where there is a separate rule for payment of gratuity. After all, in the state government or central government employees, they do not get gratuity because of the Payment of Gratuity Act, but they get the payment of gratuity under the death cum retirement gratuity rules or pension rules or some such rule. And the other restrictions or the broad framework of Payment of Gratuity Act will not be applicable to them. Another important aspect which the Supreme Court failed to appreciate or it was not properly projected is that prior to 1994, even outside the government, it is not that every employee was covered by the Payment of Gratuity Act. There used to be, by virtue of an explanation below subsection E of section 2, a wage limit. Originally, it was 750, then it was raised to 1,500, then it was raised to 2,500. Any person drawing the wage beyond that, wage the ceiling provided under explanation to section 2E of the Payment of Gratuity Act, he was not covered by the Payment of Gratuity Act. Therefore, perhaps it would have been justified in saying that payment of gratuity can be deferred as far as those employees who are outside the purview of the Payment of Gratuity Act. But from the 1994 onwards, that is the April 1994 or something like that, if I remember, the wage limit under the explanation under section 2E was removed, and today the position is, irrespective of the salary one draws, if he is a wage earner in an establishment covered by Payment of Gratuity Act, he is also covered by Payment of Gratuity Act. And to this extent, there has been no proper appreciation of the nature of gratuity payment. I can only say that the court was overwhelmed by the position in the central government or state government, which says that pension includes gratuity. Whereas in those two areas and in those two sectors, which are not governed by the Payment of Gratuity Act, such a definition may be fine. But where an establishment is governed by the Payment of Gratuity Act, such a definition would be falling foul of Payment of Gratuity Act, which is a special enactment. In fact, on an earlier occasion, when the question came whether a workman who has to be paid, who has not been paid gratuity, the employer's stand was that he has to approach the labor court under section 33C2 of the Industrial Disputes Act to get the payment of gratuity that was due to him under the Payment of Gratuity Act. Supreme Court categorically said, look, Payment of Gratuity Act is a complete code by itself, and it by implication rules out application of any other enactment insofar as the payment of gratuity is concerned, except to the extent served by section 12, that is, if a person is entitled for higher gratuity, or it is not higher gratuity, better terms of gratuity under his service rules, he is entitled to claim that also. Therefore, these two well-established aspects of Payment of Gratuity Act, that is, after 1994, every salary earner is governed by the Payment of Gratuity Act. If the establishment where he is working is covered by the Payment of Gratuity Act. And second, the Gratuity Act prevails over every other law by virtue of section 14 of the Payment of Gratuity Act, appears to have escaped serious consideration at the hands of the Supreme Court, and three-judge judgment in Rajendranath Chobe requires reconsideration. Now, how do you determine whether an enactment is a special enactment or general enactment? Payment of Gratuity Act is applicable to every employer other than the government. It is applicable to, say, let me say, research laboratories. It is applicable to municipalities. It is applicable to statutory corporations. It is applicable to companies. Therefore, it is a special enactment insofar as that aspect of the conditions of service is concerned. By excluding certain employers who have a rule like this, that is to continue the disciplinary proceedings after retirement, What the Supreme Court has done is, it has created islands of exclusion from the Payment of Gratuity Act, which is not permissible in law. See, this question, which is a special law, which is a general law, is not something new that has come up before the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, binding decisions of the larger benches was not brought to the notice of the Supreme Court. I would say there are 2-3 very important judgments. The earlier judgments, first one is the judgment of 3 judges in UP State Electricity Board versus Harishankar Jain. There the question was whether Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act would be applicable to state electricity boards. It was argued on behalf of the employer that Electricity Act, Electricity Supply Act, under which these boards have been constituted, is a special enactment. Therefore, Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, which is a general enactment, will not apply to us. Supreme Court said, look at the objective of the Electricity Supply Act. Its object reads that it is for development of electricity. Look at the object of Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act. It is to secure for the workman certain minimum standard service conditions by way of standing orders. Therefore, when it comes to development of electricity, Electricity Supply Act is a special enactment. When it comes to providing certain minimum service conditions for the workman, Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act is a special enactment. Therefore, in the matter of industrial standing orders applicable to the employees, the regulations made by the Electricity Board in exercise of powers conferred on it under the Electricity Supply Act will not have efficacy unless exemption under Section 5 capital E of the Industrial Establishments Act has been taken. Then came the LIC of India versus DJ Bahadur. There what happened? To unsettle an industrial award or an industrial settlement by invoking the provisions of the LIC Act, a regulation had been made by the LIC. Then the question before the Supreme Court was whether the award or settlement under the Industrial Disputes Act would prevail, or regulation made by the management unilaterally in exercise of statutory powers under the LIC Act would prevail. Supreme Court unhesitatingly declared that, following the UP State Electricity Board, that Industrial Disputes Act is a special enactment. When it comes to a dispute between the workman and the management. But maybe in the development and growth of insurance business, LIC has a special enactment. These principles laid down by 3-judge benches was later approved by the Constitution Bench in Ashoka Marketing versus Punjab National Bank case, where the question was whether Rent Control Act is a special enactment or Bank Nationalization Act, that is Banking Companies Acquisition and Transfer of Undertakings Act, pursuant to which Public Premises Act becomes applicable to the nationalized banks, whether that was a special enactment. Supreme Court answered that Public Premises Act would apply because Bank Nationalization Act, the Rent Control Act has to be restricted to where the rents other than to the extent to the areas that it covers is applicable. Therefore, the series of judgments that have considered the principles based on which in a given situation what is special law, what is general law are to be determined was ignored, and instead, what was relied on by the Supreme Court in the latest judgment of Mahanadi Coal Mines is a two-judge judgment in P. Rajan Sandhi, where the Supreme Court, without referring to a two-judge bench, without referring to any precedent, without discussing any principles, without stating any reason, by an ipse dixit said the Payment of Gratuity Act is a general enactment and Working Journalists Act is a special act. This is totally very, very disheartening that such a judgment as in Mahanadi Coalfields has been rendered, keeping the gratuity, which has been so far held to be a protected right of every wage earner, has been now subjected to the proceedings. Giving, yes, after an informed discussion, the Supreme Court had arrived at this finding in a reasoned manner. It would have been different, but relying on Rajan Sandhi, which does not qualify to be a precedent, such a finding has been now rendered, and I do not know for how many years the right to gratuity would suffer this present judgment. Then comes the question that was told, that was posed at the threshold by Mr. Vikas, whether the dismissal can be imposed after retirement. The judicial view in this regard is that if the disciplinary proceedings have been initiated while the employee is in service, having regard to the language of the rule, which says that they shall be continued in the same manner as if he was in service, the penalty of dismissal also can be imposed. In one judgment, it said penalty cannot be with retrospective effect, but from the date it is imposed. In such a condition, in such a situation, whether it is retrospective or prospective, it hardly matters for the employee, because from the date of retirement, he would have received only provisional pension. From the date of retirement, he would not have received any salary. From the date of retirement, he would not have received any subsistence allowance. But as a saving grace to the employee, Supreme Court said that it can only be prospective. And the retrospectivity given to the dismissal order was set aside, relying on earlier Jeevaratnam's case, and dismissal was upheld prospective. It is hardly any solace. What difference does it make whether I am dismissed from 3 years ago or today, as long as I have been denied everything for the last 3 years? I would have received only the provisional pension, which is held to be comparable to subsistence allowance paid to an employee while in service. There again, I think the words in the rule have not received a careful consideration, and the phrase used is where an employee's services are continued or continued notionally or deemed to be continued. The disciplinary proceeding shall be continued by the same authority which instituted it in the same manner. Manner, the word manner covers only the procedure and not the penalty. Manner of doing a thing is procedure of doing a thing. But Supreme Court said, again, by a very very imaginative logic, that is, look, what is the effect of dismissing a person, employee, from service? He would forfeit, his pension would stand forfeited. If he is not a pensioner, the management contribution to the pension would be forfeited. In such a case, by it can either forfeit the pension or it can dismiss the employee. Both mean the same. This is what the Supreme Court said. And people who suffer these dismissals, they know dismissal and forfeiture of pension is not one and the same, because dismissal carries with it, apart from stigma in a larger sense, it also works as a disqualification for future employment. Whereas forfeiture of pension means as pension has been forfeited. And another important thing is, if you want to impose the penalty of forfeiture of pension under the pension regulations, minimum 1/3 will have to be continued to be paid even after such a forfeiture. Whereas if you dismiss an employee, he will not be eligible for any pension. And first principles say that an employee who is in service only can be dismissed, not an employee who is deemed to be in service. This is this deeming provision. If you look at the, at least I know how this rule was evolved in the banking industry, because I myself had something to do, some part to play in making of that rule. We spoke of deemed extension. The intention of the parties at that time was that it would be only for the purpose of recovering from the management's contribution to provident fund. At that point of time, there was no pension in the banking industry. With the deeming provision was to be used only for recovering the losses caused from out of the management's contribution to the provident fund, and also for gratuity, because in 1980s, when this rule was made in the banks, the payment of gratuity was not applicable to most of the officers of the banks, because they were drawing salary of higher than 750, which was the ceiling then. And later on, when it was enhanced to 1,500 also, it excluded most of the officers. Therefore, my friends, I have tried to share some of my ideas on these post-retirement continuation or initiation of the disciplinary proceedings. As the law stands today, there is large difference, large distinguishing features between a disciplinary proceedings initiated while in service and continued after retirement. Inasmuch as there is no question of limitation, only safeguard is that highest authority in the enterprise will have to permit continuance, but dismissal can be imposed. Whereas in a post-retirement proceedings initiated, that is a proceeding initiated for the first time after the retirement, there are two limitations. One is three limitations for grave misconduct. Second, there is a limitation period of 4 years from the date of event to the date of initiation of the proceedings. And third and most important, only punishment that can be imposed in such a proceeding is recovery of loss from pension, and as has now been held by, of course, gratuity will not apply there, because by the time the proceedings are initiated, gratuity would have been paid. Subject to this that the it is order, it shall not be made at a rate more than 1/3 of the pension payable. And if pension is decided to be forfeited permanently, forfeiture, even after forfeiture, 1/3 of the pension should continue to be paid. I am grateful to all of you. Now I don't know whether there is a question answer session.
Yes, sir, we have.
I think there would be.
Yes.
That is the reason I
Yes, sir.
closed at 55 minutes, so that we will have a better interaction
Yes.
rather than my Mann Ki Baat. At least there will be a dialogue now.
Yes, sir. So like you was telling us that 1/3 pension would be there. There are two different people normally have, that the disciplinary proceedings in respect of a person where there is no pension, that is in the case of a CPF scheme, as to whether disciplinary proceedings can be done, because like what you said, in our case in Punjab and Haryana side, we have rule 2.2, what you also contemplated, that you can punish an employee for a proceedings in respect of a case which is 4 years. Number one. So, but where there is no pension, that is, he has drawn all his benefits, there is a severance of a relationship. Can you proceed disciplinary against that person where there is already a severance of relationship, everything he has drawn? The master servant relationship would come to an end or not come to an end once he draws all the benefits?
My answer to this question would be, if the rules provide, because take the case of Bhagirathi Jana versus Orissa State Financial Corporation. That was a case where there was no pension. Proceedings were continued beyond retirement for recovery of losses from the provident fund or from whatever for provident fund dues payable to the employee. Supreme Court said, in the absence of a rule, you can proceed, because after retirement, there is no inherent right. Therefore, if the Punjab government rules permit cancellation, it can be continued. Now, there are three benefits which a government employee would get on retirement. One is provident fund under the provident scheme, provident fund scheme applicable to the government employees, not under the payment of, not under the Employees Provident Fund Act. Second is gratuity under death cum retirement gratuity rules. Payment of cash equivalent of. Now, what the employers would do is, if they have paid all these things, all the general EPF, whatever is there, it is paid. Then DCRG is paid. Leave encashment also is paid. In such a situation, since no other penalty can be imposed, it will be a proceedings. That is, it will be somewhat like the proceedings initiated against Karnataka MLAs recently by the Speaker. Supreme Court upheld disqualification, upheld the finding of guilt, but it quashed the penalty on the ground that there is no provision in law to have issued this penalty. Therefore, in the post-retirement proceedings where all the retirement benefits have already been paid, it is a luxurious exuberance to continue with the disciplinary proceedings, whose ultimate result would be no penalty can be imposed. Such a proceedings we can successfully challenge as a futile proceedings, which would only harass the retired employee and cause loss to the public exchequer and nothing beyond. Therefore, where employee has received all the retirement benefits and there is no pension to be continued to be paid, then the disciplinary proceedings, even if permissible, would be futile. But if the proceedings have been initiated while in service, they would, because under this government rules, pension includes gratuity or pay. Even without pension, there can be gratuity. And provident fund, what if they under the triple benefit scheme, whatever the management, the government has contributed, that could be withdrawn, but not the employee's contribution to provident fund.
So, this is by Kashmiri Lal Singla. Whether the management can also withhold payments of the contributions under the EPF, which is maintained by the EPF organization, either under the pendency or conclusion of the disciplinary proceedings.
EPF, if a person is covered by Employees Provident Fund, his position stands on a different footing, because there is no provision under the Employees Provident Fund Act to withhold management's contribution. Once it has been paid, it has been paid. The question of withholding the management's contribution arises if there is a rule to that effect. For example, in under the EPF Act, certain employers are permitted to have their own provident funds instead of being part of the EPF organization. The provident fund rules there would be generally governed by the trust deed or the rules governing the provident fund, and sometimes by statutory regulations also, which provide that if the disciplinary proceedings are pending at the time of retirement, the employee will not be entitled to receive management's contribution to PF. In such cases, management's contribution to PF could be forfeited to the extent of loss suffered, but in a case covered, which is where it is remitted to EPF organization, it cannot be withheld. Because there again, EPF Act also contains a this clause to override, that is, I think section 12 of the EPF Act, it overrides any other contract to the contrary.
Yes, sir. This is by Vikas. If police officer is involved in a case of a forgery of charge sheet documents, what action can be taken against her to stop her pension?
Prosecution is in progress. At the time when the constable retires from service, then the pension, that is commuted value of pension and the gratuity under the payment of under the DCRG rules, they can be withheld until conclusion of the prosecution. But a gray area exists there also. If the prosecution for offense of fraud is in respect of an event which has causal relationship with the employment, that is, suppose some police records have been forged, then the withholding clause would, without much difficulty, apply. But if it is in relation to a transaction which has no causal connection with his employment, then I don't think that the employer state would be entitled to withhold the payment of gratuity or payment of commuted value of pension. Ultimately, it depends whether it is an employment misconduct or a misconduct outside the employment.
Sir, a lot of issues normally arise in the mind of a common man or some lawyers also. What will you contemplate disciplinary proceedings? Because they say that you can withhold the pension once there are disciplinary proceedings.
Yes, this is a very tricky question in the normal sense, in normal circumstances. But luckily for all, the rules providing for continuation of the disciplinary, they themselves provide when it can be said that disciplinary proceedings have been are contemplated. If it is in respect of a disciplinary proceedings, the disciplinary proceedings commence only on the day the charge memo is issued, not a day earlier. If it is in respect of a criminal case, trial must have commenced. What is the commencement of trial? Constitution bench headed by Justice P. Sadasivam has said that is on the day the charge is framed. Then, even in respect of a suspension. This question came before Delhi High Court at the earliest, because most of these rules provide, yes, an employee can be pending or in contemplation of disciplinary proceedings. In contemplation means what? Whether it is managing director decides, this fellow is playing too much, I want to teach him a lesson. Whether that would amount to contemplation of disciplinary proceedings. There, Justice Kirpal, speaking for Delhi High Court, he said that contemplation means not contemplation of preliminary investigation. Investigation must have been conducted and a decision should have been taken to initiate the disciplinary proceedings. But actual charge sheet might not have been issued. It is at that stage the question of contemplation comes. But insofar as these pension rules are concerned, it is very clearly stipulated in the rules itself as to when it can be said that the disciplinary proceedings are contemplated. If I may quote section rule 9 of the pension rules 1972, it says the that is the departmental proceedings in the case the government servant. That rule says that disciplinary proceedings are commenced only on the date of issuance of a charge sheet. Therefore, the rule, the phrase used there is, if the, that is, this is the word used there is where departmental proceedings are instituted. Instituted means it should have actually commenced, not mere contemplation. Instituted means the disciplinary proceedings are said to have been instituted. It has been issued. Issued means not necessarily served. Issued means it would have been signed and put in transit to the address of the employee. Contemplation would not work there. Contemplation concept that is applicable when the employee is still in service, not after retirement.
Right, sir. In fact, K.V. Janaki Raman way back had contemplated what is the charge sheet in the criminal
K.V.
case.
Janaki Raman was in respect of
promotion.
Promotions,
but
by the employees in service. There the Supreme Court said disciplinary proceedings means charge memo should have been issued, whereas criminal proceedings means sanction to prosecute must have been issued. That is, the investigation is over, charge sheet draft stage has also been submitted to the employer, and sanction has been given to prosecute. What remains is only filing the charge sheet before the court. The pension rules clearly define when the prosecution can be said to be commenced, when the judicial proceedings can be to be commenced, that is in respect of officers, and when the disciplinary proceedings can be said to have been instituted. On that aspect, the rules are clear and fortunately no scope for any vagueness is left there.
For pension release, that judgment is Jitendra Kumar would also come into being. Jitendra Kumar Srivastava of 2013.
You cannot withhold pension except in the absence of a statutory rule having force of law. That is their position. In fact, they now we are under a very wrong notion that now the right to pension, right to property has been from the fundamental rights. Therefore, employers can play with pension and gratuity. That is a very wrong concept because, no doubt, right to property has been withdrawn from the fundamental rights. Simultaneously, Article 300 capital A has introduced right to property as a constitutional right, though not a fundamental right. And in a number of cases, Supreme Court has said, right to property is a human right. If it is a human right to property, if it is a human right, I do not see much difficulty in asserting that right to pension is also a human right.
Yes. So we have Anurag Jain. He wants to ask a question directly. We have unmuted him.
Sir, my question is that can an employee of a state-owned electricity department be dismissed in pursuance to not by an appointing authority of a different department, though of a same stature? Here, my appointing authority was SC operation in the electricity department. My client has been admin. Charge sheet is issued by SC admin, and the delinquent did not object to it, even in appeal and even in the revision authority. Now he is there. So can he object to this part at the stage of High Court, and can he be dismissed by an authority of a same stature?
My answer to this would be like this. It is Article 311 of the Constitution which speaks of the protection of not being dismissed by an officer inferior to that of an appointing authority. That is applicable only to the government servants. It has no application whatsoever to the instrumentalities of state like the electricity board. There the appointing authority, it can be different from dismissing authority. Usually there will be in the discipline and appeal regulations governing the establishment. There will be a schedule which provides for who is the disciplinary authority, up to what penalty he can impose. All those things will be defined. Therefore, the defined disciplinary authority empowered to dismiss can dismiss even if he is not the appointing authority, as far as the servants who are not government servants are concerned. Then the question is about the superintending engineer admin issuing the charge memo and issuing the dismissal. The law is fairly well settled that if he is the disciplinary authority named in the regulations, he can initiate disciplinary proceedings. If he is the dismissing authority named in the regulations, he can dismiss also. See, in public sector, we also come across cases where while charge sheet is issued, the employee will be working under the control of a particular discipline authority, say Lucknow General Manager. During the pendency of the disciplinary proceedings, he is transferred to Patna, a different circle or different zone or whatever it is. Then the Patna disciplinary authority will get jurisdiction over the employee. This question was answered by the Supreme Court in the case of an Allahabad Bank employee where Assistant General Manager was the disciplinary authority named. The jurisdiction changed during the pendency of the disciplinary proceedings. Then the Supreme Court held as long as the Assistant General Manager who is scheduled to be the disciplinary authority has imposed the penalty, no objection can be taken whether he is Lucknow AGM or Patna AGM. This is the law on that. The concept of not being dismissed except by appointing authority is applicable only to the government servants who are covered by Article 309 to Article 311 of the Constitution of India, and not to employees of instrumentalities of the state.
And sir, if he has not objected to this, because in my case, the regulation says he can be only dismissed by SC operation, not by SC admin, but SC admin has dismissed him. So in that case, he has not objected to that jurisdiction before the statutory remedies.
Yes, yes.
He can object to it before High Court now.
Mr. Jain, your question is that jurisdiction, if the disciplinary authority who purportedly acted as disciplinary authority, if he did not have the jurisdiction,
Yes.
whether he will get jurisdiction by acquiescence.
Yes, that's my question. Correct.
Your question is whether consent confers jurisdiction.
Correct. Yes, my acquiescence. Yes, perfectly fine, sir. I am so grateful.
See, I am of the same view as you are having, that consent does not confer jurisdiction. But there are judgments to the contrary. For example, suppose take the case of sanction to prosecute under Prevention of Corruption Act, Section 19. It is mandatory. Without a valid sanction, there can be no prosecution. No court shall take cognizance. But about incompetence of the sanctioning authority or the authority who has sanctioned, if you don't raise the objection at the earliest point of time in the trial, you cannot raise it in the appeal. Because the question of not exactly waiver, but the question of miscarriage of justice will have to be established while we are raising that issue in the appeal.
Yes.
And another concept in public law is that if want of jurisdiction has been raised at the earliest point of time, there would have been an opportunity for the employer to correct it. They could have withdrawn that charge sheet and got the charge sheet issued, or the proceedings conducted by a competent authority. You keep quiet throughout and you raise it in the writ proceedings for the first time, whether that should be permitted. Common sense says it should be permitted. But the court sense says that since you did not raise this objection, perhaps deliberately, to see that you raise it at a time when the management has no option, no choice to correct it. Therefore, you should not be given the benefit of your own wrong. That is also a judicially settled principle.
Benefit would be attributed to the employee and not to the employer.
See, if the employer has acted malafide, the employee also would have been equally malafide in keeping quiet on this. In one judgment which arose from the University of Mysore statutes, it was a bench headed by Justice S.B. Mujumdar as Chief Justice of High Court, and companion judge was Justice T.S. Thakur, who later on became the Chief Justice of India. That bench held. It was clearly a case where Vice Chancellor had no jurisdiction, had no competence. Syndicate was the competent authority. But the employer had kept quiet throughout and raised it for the first time in the writ petition. Then the High Court said, you have to suffer the consequence of your wrong, you cannot raise it now. But I think that was an extreme case where conduct of the employee mattered. Otherwise, generally, the principle is consent does not confer.
But do we have some law on that part that consent does not confer jurisdiction?
That is true. Consent does not confer jurisdiction.
But there is some judgments to that effect.
There are the case law is that if you do not have jurisdiction, I cannot confer jurisdiction on you.
Yes, that's right. But here, see, what I feel, this is sort of a territorial jurisdiction. Territorial jurisdiction is the most weak type of an objection.
It is not a territorial jurisdiction even. Yes, what the case referred by you is a question of territorial jurisdiction.
Yes.
It does not render the decree void.
Yes, that's what I think. That's what I think, that it is sort of a territorial jurisdiction, which is the weakest form of objection.
Even otherwise, the case of Mysore University that I referred to was a case of self-jurisdiction, because Vice Chancellor, whose territory is the entire university, had no jurisdiction. Syndicate, which is above him, only has jurisdiction.
Has jurisdiction.
But court held that you ought to have raised it at the earliest time.
But the petty employee is not conscious. He is an employee and he is not conscious of the jurisdiction's part. It is we legal person who understands this jurisdiction.
There what happens? The ground should be the rules were not made known to me. I am after all slightly above the illiteracy, being a Group D employee. I did not know my rights because my rights were not informed to me by the employer. That is the reason usually in the disciplinary inquiries, first question that is asked is, are you aware of the rules under which these proceedings are being held? Second question is, have you understood the charges? These questions are not intended to be the exuberances of the Victorian era. They are an effort to make the employee know his rights and the consequences of it. In fact, there is one judgment of the, though not of the Supreme Court, of the Karnataka High Court, at least with respect to the bank employee court held that rules were not made known to him in spite of his asking. This is at least he knew that he should ask. There are employees who do not even know that they have a right to ask. They come to my office and say, sir, I was not aware that I can ask for it. What do you do with such cases?
That is all my case. They didn't put me in a question. Are you conscious of the charge sheet? They didn't put me a question. I said, and not the department. Everything is on the shoulders of the litigant.
Then if you have pleaded in the writ petition, I was not aware of the.
I have not pleaded. I have not pleaded this.
That ultimately it is pleading, you know.
No, that I have not.
Pleading.
Yes, pleading is not there because I was not conscious of this provision. That's why pleading is not there. Honestly speaking.
Not only my client, I was also not aware. This is a good one.
Yes, I am saying that I was not conscious of this provision. That's why I did not plead it. So what to put the question to it?
Let us pray that the judge who decides also will not know this distinction.
He knows this. That's why I am before asking on speaker. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And there is only two issues according to me would arise because they always change. One, that there is a judgment by Honorable Mr. Justice S.S. Ledger. One, he was there, though it was the case of a pension of scheme. He said that no sane person will work against it. Therefore, it was a case of a pension when the option had not been given. They said that any sane person would like to defend himself in that way. So I say that Anurag can always take a point that this is a statutory provision. Number two, according to me, would be that there would be no embargo against the statutory regulations. Number three, my submission, if I had been in the shoes of Anurag, then I would say that there is no estoppel against law. So one, statutory provisions provide for a particular manner. Then the law to that effect, way back that Bihar judgment on the election law, as well as thereafter 2015 Tata Chemicals, which says if a rule prescribes for a particular manner, it has to be done in that manner alone.
It's true.
Any vitiation thereof would not.
Taylor versus Taylor, that if law prescribes in a particular, it shall be done in that manner or not done at all. If law stipulates a procedure, all other procedures are deemed to have been excluded.
It is just like I say it's just like Section 3 of the Limitation Act. Even if you're not taken the plea, it is incumbent upon the court to decide. Similarly, it is the case where the regulations prescribe for a particular manner that he is the punishing authority.
One case of bias in which this principle has been applied in the matter of disciplinary proceedings is where Honorable Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya wrote the judgment. it was a case where a member of the managing committee appeared before the inquiry officer as a witness. Then, after the inquiry report was submitted, he himself sat as the part of the managing committee to discipline him and dismiss the employee. It is a glaring case of bias
Yes.
based on undisputed facts.
Correct.
Even before the High Court, that question was. So before Supreme Court, that issue was raised. Then Lordship Justice Venkatachalaya said, yes, we agree that this issue has not been raised anywhere. But where it is based on undisputed facts and where it is borne out by record, we have to go into it to render justice. That view also can be taken.
Yes.
But these are now, yesterday I was reading in Indian Express, judicial barbarism. I may not subscribe to the entire thing what he has written. But one thing that appealed to me was that these days, precedents are given a go by.
Yes.
And more often than not, judgment is rendered on the basis of what the judge concerned feels the correct principle. In such a situation, I can only say Anurag Jain will have better luck than the better final decision.
Or the other way around is also, we can't say simplicity to the judges also. If you do not tell a particular judgment, like what you were saying, that judgment, wherein it, the principle of Justice Venkat Chalaiya was
most
that.
of the time, I agree with you, Mr. Vikas. Most of the times, it is we who contribute to wrong judgments because we would not apprise the court of the binding precedents, particularly with reference to the fact situation prevailing in the case we are arguing.
That's what
It is always a lack of preparation on our part, or sometimes lack of presence of mind on sometimes because
Yes.
we might have read the whole night, previous night with the file. But that particular point may not occur while we are on our feet. All
I
these
would-
contribute to wrong judgment.
What they say that one who is watching a match in the stadium would always say that the player should have hit the goal in such a manner. The player who is playing the match actually knows why he couldn't play that goal. And the judgment probably of Justice Venkat Chalaiya was probably based upon that nobody can be judged in its own case. When he said that the Vice Chancellor took participation in the normal course, and thereafter
that is
when
true.
he was,
He went by the he went by the fundamental principle of administrative law.
nobody can be judged in its own case.
Yes.
It's a violation of principle of natural justice.
Yes.
That's that probably judgment name is Braith. That is 2002 judgment. Which say nobody can be judged.
I am very weak in remembering the
Citations.
because luckily throughout my 33 years of practice, I have been getting good colleagues who even in the days of no software, would come up with, whenever I just raise my hand and look at them, they would give the judgment. That is the type of colleagues I have been fortunate to have.
So,
Therefore,
rather I would say I had gone to one of the very senior advocate. He had written a placard in his name. He says that a good manager is one who keeps the better people under him. So, and thank you, sir, for all the insights. We are all quite grateful to you for the insights given by you. And tomorrow we have a session at 4 p.m. Doctrine of Bona Fide Purchaser and the Way Forward, Section 53 of the Transfer of Property Act, by Mr. K. Prabhakar, a very seasoned lawyer from Madras High Court. He has already given insights on our platform, and that session was quite well received. So do stay connected with us. And on behalf of Beyond Law CLC and all those participants who have asked time and again, I have to say, on the Facebook, ultimately on the YouTube channel, and on this platform. We are all grateful the way you have given us the insights. As I said, that there are points which you have actually chiseled it out in the right perspective, and I'm quite sure that people would
Thank
actually.
you.
Thank you, sir.